Monday. So if you can be,
Tuesday.
I mean, on Tuesday. Have I completely confused you now? So I'm on Tuesday. So if you can be here, that's great. Or even online. Then Thursday will be our final. We'll do some more of the Dharma Cloud. And then we have Rahatsu Sesshin, which I hesitate to say, but part of me wants to say will be a lot of fun. You should come. I mean, this is for Zen people. This is a party. This is how Zen people do parties. Sorry. But we just decided we're going to try to do a fire for one night for our service. Be outside with the fire, so we'll see if we can pull that off. And we also do a Buddha's enlightenment. Oh, that's not. Anyway, we'll figure out something. We do a Buddha's enlightenment ceremony, which is really a really lovely, joyous ceremony. And then on Sunday, and if you're in the practice period, this is really important. It's a week from this Sunday, I guess. Yikes. There is a Shuso ceremony, Hosen Chiki Shuso ceremony, where we all get to ask Rachel a question. We'll say more about that next week, and the closing of the practice period. So we have lots of wonderful and exciting things coming up. But in Zen, you don't get too excited until you do.
And tomorrow night at Courthouse Square?
Yeah, tomorrow night there's flyers here at Courthouse Square from 5 to 6. Bring a candle. There's a vigil. We're going to do this monthly, and just show up there and be together in bearing witness to bringing light into the darkness. And I hear and understand there's going to be some song and there'll be some silence, and we'll see what happens. So with that, why don't you lead us in the yeah.
Surpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is ready met with even 100,000 million kalpas, having it to see and listen to remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
So, hi everyone. Hi. Hello everyone online. I was thinking this was going to be my last opportunity to speak as Shuso, aside from the ritual next Sunday. And so I was going to try to tie things up, but evidently I will have another opportunity. And so I think I'm gonna mostly stick with it's the ninth gate today. I want to leave enough time for us to chant, and so we'll see how the timing hasn't been sort of my strongest point, but so just in bringing myself here, I think I want to just say that I've been, especially given my path of the last few years, really moved and maybe a little rattled by the passing of a couple of women who I actually didn't know personally or well personally, but know well people to whom they are very dear and essential, and who passed from cancer after, they were doing well, kind of. And then hearing recently of two other people who were just diagnosed, and just noticing the way that affects me. my sense of hope and groundedness is a little wobbly a lot of the time. The phrase, I attribute it to Andrea Gibson, but that might be complete fiction, because I've been doing a lot of reading and thinking, and I don't even know where most of what I'm going to talk about is actually who actually said it. But this phrase, a crash course in impermanence, and just thinking about that for myself, and then just also thinking, right, how many of us in our Sangha and Mahasangha have been touched by cancer, by illness, by the death of a loved one, by a fall, by any of these things that just in that moment, right? Just so I feel like I have lost some of the privilege. I'm not sure that's what it was, but the comfort of not being so faced with that. But anyway, just noticing what that arising for me in my sitting. And I'm not sure exactly how that ties into my talk, but I'm sure it ultimately will. We'll make it so. Because what I'm noticing in the ninth ground and what's associated with it is this move from cultivation of capacities, skills, I don't even know what to call them really when it in the Avatamsaka Sutra, people, the bodhisattvas are just continually gathering and accumulating all of these amazing attributes and capacities, which I'm not able to really fathom what they are, even reading them. But there is this turn toward now bringing it back, bringing it into action. And interestingly, this ninth ground is correlated with the perfection, the paramita, bala paramita, which is the perfection of strength, the perfection of powers, which sort of also implies the moving out from whatever I imagine is more of an internal moving up the ladder, so to speak, the round ladder, we'll call it. So the ninth ground is called Sadhumati Bhumi, which is the ninth of the stages or levels of bodhisattvas that bodhisattvas traverse on the path to enlightenment and Buddhahood. It is known as the ground of excellent intelligence, or the perfect or auspicious intellect ground. It is correlated with the four unimpeded knowledges, which I'll probably read to you, but I won't spend time on. And then the perfection of strength and powers, which I will spend a little time on. So briefly, a summation of what is accomplished, if that's the word, in the ground of excellent intelligence, wisdom and skillful means. So bodhisattvas on this ground have attained an exceptional advanced level of wisdom or prajna and mastery of Dharma teachings. They excel in four specific perfect understandings: the Dharma, its actual words, its meanings, and the confidence or eloquence to expound the Dharma. And makes a point of saying, while not quite as eloquent or the same as the Buddha's understanding, concordant with them, so with the Buddha's understanding. And it's called the ground of excellent intelligence because these bodhisattvas have attained an exceptional practice of these four, and this allows them to preach the Dharma freely without any restriction. They can employ skillful means, which we talked about last week, upaya, to teach and benefit sentient beings. I love this next part. It also entails being able to ripen beings for salvation. And so the primary activity of a bodhisattva in the ninth ground is to guide and prepare innumerable beings for salvation by liberating those capable of being transformed according to the Buddha's teachings. And it is on this level that they fully understand and perfect the ability to teach the doctrine. This is a very advanced stage. It's 9 of 10. It's grouped with the path of no more learning, which we started with last week in the 8th ground. From this point on, and I love this image. From this point on, bodhisattvas move quickly toward awakening. Before this stage, progress was comparatively slow, like that of a boat being towed toward a harbor. On the 8th through 10th bhumi, however, bodhisattvas make huge strides toward Buddhahood, like a ship that has reached the ocean and unfurls its sails. Isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
This level is associated with becoming a Brahma, which I'm thinking kind of not so much the god Brahma, but just this high level that one might be reborn as the ultimate reality, the changeless, all-pervading, and eternal principle of the universe. And there's the cultivation of power, which I want to speak mostly about. So there are 10 powers of the Buddha and 6 supernatural powers, and there's all kinds of numbers of other kinds of powers. We are going to basically talk about the 5 faculties or spiritual powers. And there's a lot in here that I found interesting, and I don't know if I'll succeed, but I want to make some kind of connection between that and the 9th ground. So in Sanskrit and Pali, bala means power, strength, might, vigor, force, validity, force or power of articulation, expertness in. So it's these definitions always bring in things that don't sound exactly like what I initially think, but everything seems very expansive. And I think we talked about this, Chris talked about this last week, that it also carries the meaning of stability, like wasn't it the immovable stability of Dharma, which I think is a really interesting phrase. So, the 5 powers are actually first known as the 5 faculties. Faculties I think of are like capacities. We're born with them, and as we practice them, they actually become the 5 powers. With use and practice, they become our strength and powers. And so I've been thinking about this word capacity and these different meanings. Like capacity can be speaking about something latent in us that we have the potential for. But it can also mean that we actually have the ability or the actual skill to do something. So it has these two aspects. And so related to this idea of the faculties or these potentials, this kind of brings me back to what I've been reading a lot in this wonderful book of Thich Nhat Hanh's The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching, where he uses, I'm going to say it's a metaphor, but maybe it's not a metaphor, of the vast field of Buddhahood that we all dwell in, and that there are all of these seeds. It's helping me understand a little bit this notion that I continue to grapple with of like how every human being is a Buddha or has the capacity to be a Buddha. But I think what it means is that we all live in this field of the same seeds, the same potential, we come into the world with the same capacity or potential, and what he calls store consciousness, right? So there are negative seeds and positive seeds, and that depending upon the conditions, which seeds thrive. That actually helps me to understand a little bit more of what's going on in the world, right? Because we all have vulnerabilities and are born into different conditions that that allow different seeds to be fed and then to grow. That just, I don't know if that's helpful at all for you. So we all have the capacity for these 5 powers: faith, awakening, understanding, awareness. Those are 4, but that's one way that they're described. The 5 actually are faith, diligence or energy, mindfulness, concentration, and insight. And Thich Nhat Hanh uses this metaphor of the 5 faculties as the basis, or he calls them the bases. These 5 faculties are power plants that can help us generate the energy that we need, because all of these things, right, faith, mindfulness, concentration, like they all take a lot of energy. And that once we have developed this energy, they become the 5 powers, which is then energy and action. And I've been really, I think since my first talk, really looking for this link between this, what feels like a very esoteric sutra, and the meaning of like, why are we studying this and how is this relevant to those of us who, just speaking for myself, not for any of you, I have no sense that I'm going to achieve Buddhahood in this lifetime. And so how does this speak to me? So we're all existing in the same field of potential, and the question is, what seeds do we water and how do we water them and how do we create the right conditions? So I'm going to talk a little bit about these 5 faculties, 5 spiritual powers, mostly based on Thich Nhat Hanh. But I also found this really lovely piece in The Lion's Roar called Cultivating the 5 Powers, that's written by one of his students, who's a medical doctor, a Plum Village monastic, Sister Dang, I'm going to say Nyem. She's known as Sister D for obvious reasons. And so, yeah, I think I'll just kind of go through these, how they talk about these 5 faculties, these 5 potential spiritual powers. So the first is faith. And I really like the way Thich Nhat Hanh talks about faith. that it's not blind faith. We're not in Buddhism asked to believe anything, to have faith in anything, to trust in anything that we haven't experienced ourselves. And so he says that faith is the confidence we receive when we put into practice a teaching that helps us overcome difficulties and obtain some transformation. And Sister D talks about, just how, including herself, how many of us come into practice because of some suffering. And interestingly, she actually correlates the word trauma that is so current in the current use to what the Buddha meant by trauma, and what's this experience that's overwhelming that we're not able to integrate. And what she says is that she calls Buddha a great psychologist, which he was, because he understood that in Erickson's stages of development, stage 1 is trust versus mistrust. The first thing we really need to do is to come to trust ourselves, which is the most challenging and essential thing to trust. And she says it's like that when we come to practice, we don't have trust in practice or in ourselves, but slowly we see that practice helps us. It helps, for me, it's helped me calm down. It's helped me to be less cynical, less judgmental, less cranky, less hopeless. And it's helped me to be there for my feelings. And then when I say, okay, I am being here for myself, then the practice slowly helps to further instill that hope and faith. So it's not, she says, it's not that I come to trust the Buddha as an entity outside of me. I actually gain first and foremost trust in the practice and in myself, and that I have the capacity to be awake, aware, and to care for myself and others. Diligence or energy is the second of powers. It's also talked about as effort or persistence. And it's what brings joy into our practice. And I was thinking about energy, because energy is the one that I most struggle with, because I experience a lot of fatigue. And that in my mindfulness meditation practice, that the energy isn't just physical energy, although that stamina is important, but given what comes up, all the thoughts, all of the craziness that comes up in my mind and that I'm more and more aware of, that it also takes self-reflective energy. It takes emotional energy. It takes what I would call imaginative or creative energy. That there's all these kinds of energy that we need, I think, to have in order to be steady in our practice, or at least for me, I do. Mindfulness, the third one, allows us to look deeply and to see what is going on. Being present to, noticing our inner states, our thoughts, some of which can be very disturbing. The relentlessness, at least for me, the relentlessness of them, the repetitiveness, just sometimes the content. It's like, wow, where is this coming from? Concentration, the fourth one, is needed for mindfulness. It's also a fruit of mindfulness. It's our focus and discipline. And then insight, which is the ability to look deeply and see clearly, And it's also the understanding that's the result of the practice of looking deeply. Yeah, I think it is important to just say here that Sister D talks about, that what she learned from Thich Nhat Hanh, that true to the teaching of interbeing, like this is in that and that is in this, and this is not in that and that is not in this, and everything is in each other. So true to that spirit, the 5 faculties or the 5 powers are all in each other and empower each other. And that if you're practicing one, you're practicing all 5. And when we work well with them, our faculties become powers. So as I mentioned, I'm kind of finding myself returning to this earlier theme around for myself and as Shuso bringing what I'm bringing to Sangha, this theme of relevance, and that while the teachings in the 10 grounds seems to me to emphasize the cultivation of what I think of as sort of transpersonal or more than human capacities, I can lean more on these perfections, these paramitas that feel a little bit more accessible, although of course the more I read about them, they're just as inaccessible in some ways. But I do very much want to create the world I want to live in, right? We talked about that a little bit last week. So how do I take this sort of wild mind and troubled mind and distracted mind and find my way to create what I want to live in, which is harmony and community and justice and peace and kindness and joy. And so both these higher grounds and these paramitas now are focusing on taking these insights and qualities, awarenesses that have been cultivated in the earlier grounds and are asking us now to teach, to lead, to assist others. And these faculties that we are all working with and that we come in with and nurture become powers that then can fuel our practice and action on the behalf of others. I listened to this morning actually a talk by Rebecca Solnit. I think many of you might be familiar with her. It was at Upaya, and it was called Sutra and Suture have the same root. She's very political, and so she talks about how how we act, our beliefs, our principles, our commitments, our values, how we act on them in public life is not separate from our spiritual life and our practice. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about our Sangha to whatever extent, whether it's on a one-on-one level or really trying to make some larger change in the world, that these are values that we're trying to really manifest. And she starts by speaking about empathy as the precursor to compassion. And again, kind of coming full circle, talking about empathy entailing the capacity for imagination, right? To perceive what doesn't yet exist. And so it's the ability to feel what we don't literally feel, to extend beyond ourselves, to imagine what another's experience might be, and to act from that place. And this active, imaginative empathy becomes active care, which is compassion. She says the ability to include another's experience in our own is a fundamental human capacity. So it feels like there's some mirroring happening there. So this idea of sutra and suture, She says it's sewing back together what has been torn apart. And I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about this sutra and probably every sutra, right? There's this way that in all these different teachings, which evidently are all the same teaching, what we're trying to do, or what the teaching is that the way I think we're designed as humans, we inevitably we're torn apart from our natural state of knowing interbeing and interconnectedness, and that we're all the same. And I think about this as, it's like when we think about the word repairing, is another way of, right, it's repairing, it's bringing back together what has been bifurcated or separated, or thinking about healing as bringing back to wholeness. So I really like that sutra being that sewing back together what has been torn apart. She says the imaginative act of feeling what you do not feel in your own body, what is not happening to you, of caring about what is not yourself, is one of the ways the world is made whole, is sewn together. And I think the current discourse that we're living in, and I don't know how many of you read it, it's been in a bunch of the papers and whatever, that Tatiana Schlossberg, Carolyn Kennedy's daughter, who has just been, well, not just been, but is just now writing about this terrible, very fatal diagnosis that she has, and, sparing no words for her cousin, who has cut funding for so many, well, first of all, it's just part of a administration that is just so cruel and sadistic, but is really cutting funding for so much research that could save her life and so many others. But so given the current discourse, and what Rebecca Solnit talks about is the ideology of isolation, right? There's all this stuff now in the MAGA world of, like, there's too much empathy. No, seriously, there's people who are really writing about that. That's one of the problems we have now, is that there's too much empathy. So she raises the question of how do we cultivate solidarity across difference? And I guess this is also hearkening back to my first talk, who is inside or outside of our circle of care? Who do we relate to, feel for, want to protect? What are the limits and potentials of our care? And then she ends by saying, that contemporary science is telling us that the interbeing and interconnectedness is a fact of nature, not just an aspiration of our practice. I think that's really important for us to remember and hold. It just gives me so much, even more respect for the practice and the teachings. So I've talked longer as usual than I thought. Shall we chant rather than go into small groups? Okay.
Can I share? I don't know how this one started the night, because I'm letting you do it, but they each chapter seems to begin with that everybody gets more and more delighted. They have this sense of joyful delight and they start elevating. And I was sitting here feeling more and more delighted and elevating. And the kind of delightful thing about it is that you're so serious when you're doing it. And then this image that I just want to share because it hadn't come before is one of the ways I know Rachel is at Food for Thought, which is a food bank that what was your position there?
I had a bunch.
You had a bunch of them anyway. You go into her office and she had a huge avalokiteshvara that was just, I mean, it just dominated the energy. But the food bank itself was so beautiful. It was just common things. It was like cans of food, and I'm just seeing the vegetables and the peppers and I mean, everything about it was just so ordinary, but the way it was all lined up and done was sublime. And that feels like part of what.
Yeah, it was intentionally beautiful.
Yes, and it was set up for people who were sick or in need, but you just walked in and you were suddenly so far gone beyond because of care and love and faith and mindfulness. And so I wanted to, that feels like what you're teaching, which you've always been teaching. Anyway, I just wanted to.
Thank you. Yeah, that felt like a, it was quite an experience, and a lot of care did go into it. Yeah, I have this, I just have to say this because I thought it was funny and I haven't said anything funny yet today. But when I was thinking about, when I was talking about insight, and I was just thinking about the sort of like I have had insights as Shuso. I actually have. And I had this thought about, well, I had my little insights, but I don't know that they actually caused tremors or sent forth everywhere immensely radiant light that illuminated with dazzling brilliance thousands of myriads cotis of celestial nymphs springing up into light, filled with joyous exultation in body and mind, each playing measurelessly many kinds of music. But perhaps so. Perhaps so. I would have been so sad to just have left that on that got cut,
Put that in the newsletter.
Yeah. Okay, so let me find does everybody or enough people have I have it on screen. So I was thinking I would say the stuff in bold. And we'll probably do a little skipping, but so we already know about the invitation and all of everything that's already taken place. So we're going to go right into this Bodhisattva's 10 types of reality-based knowledge of karma. Child of the Buddha, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, dwelling on this ground of excellent intelligence, knows in accordance with reality the effects of practicing dharmas that are good, bad, and karmically neutral, the effects of practicing dharmas either associated with or free of the contaminants, the effects of practicing worldly dharmas and world-transcending dharmas, the effects of practicing dharmas that are conceivable and dharmas that are inconceivable, the effects of practicing the dharmas that are definite and the dharmas that are indefinite, the effects of practicing Shravaka dharmas and dharmas of Pratyeka Buddhas, the effects of practicing the Bodhisattva practice dharmas, the effects of practicing dharmas of the Tathagata's ground, the effects of practicing conditioned dharmas, the effects of practicing unconditioned dharmas, This bodhisattva uses such wisdom to know in accordance with reality the entangling thickets in being's mind, specifically knowing the entangling thicket of the affliction, the entangling thicket of karmic actions, the entangling thicket of the faculties, the entangling thicket of the sense beliefs, the entangling thicket of the sense realms, the entangling thicket of resolute intentions, the entangling thicket of latent tendencies, the entangling thicket of births, the entangling thicket of the continuity of karmic propensities, and the entangling thicket associated with the differences among the three groups of beings. This bodhisattva knows in accordance with reality all of the different sorts of characteristics of being mind, specifically knowing the characteristic of arriving scared, the characteristic with transformation, the characteristic of either being destroyed or undestroyed, the characteristic of having no physical form, the characteristic of becoming boundless, the characteristic of purity, the characteristic of being either defiled or undefiled, the characteristic of being held in bondage or free from bondage, the characteristic of either being active endeavors, and the characteristic of manifesting in accordance with the destinies of rebirth. Child of the Buddha, the Bodhisattva who accords with knowledge such as this is said to dwell on the ground of excellent intelligence. Having come to dwell on this ground, they completely know all the different aspects of beings' actions, teach and train them, and thereby cause them to gain liberation. I'm thinking we should end there. And maybe we can, in future chanting, groups finish this one. So I do, unsurprisingly, have a poem that I wanted to leave you with. I've been remiss in sharing more of Andrea Gibson's work. So I want to just share this one tiny little piece that really speaks to me. And actually, I don't think I did a good job of connecting it, but Thich Nhat Hanh in this whole chapter talks about, being little and just feeling like he grew up in paradise. And then as he got older and had more worries or whatever, felt like paradise was lost. And then through his practice realized that awe and paradise was just always here. And there's this line in Andrea Gibson's work where they say, don't we want to know that we lived like we never forgot we were born astonished and were never intended to grow out of awe? Mm-hmm. So here's the poem. It's by Jan Richardson. It's called Blessed Are You Who Bear the Light. Blessed are you who bear the light in unbearable times, who testify to its endurance amid the unendurable, who bear witness to its persistence when everything seems in shadow and grief. Blessed are you in whom the light lives, in whom the brightness blazes, your heart a chapel, an altar where in the deepest night can be seen the fire that shines forth in you in unaccountable faith, in stubborn hope, in love that illumines every broken thing it finds. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.